long-running television program or TV network will inevitably run into its dark age, or dork age, or whatever you wish to call the period of time when its content quality drops severely and people really start to wonder what the heck the people behind the scenes are doing. And if for the Generation X, the best example of that was MTV, for the millennial generation, Exhibit A would most likely be Cartoon Network. When Time Warner decided to create an entire 24-hour network airing nothing but animation, it completely changed how the medium would be viewed in Western culture. No longer were cartoons just relegated to Saturday mornings or weekday afternoons. And with this gained the potential that maybe, for the first time in decades, cartoons could be looked at as something more than just for kids. As the network ultimately expanded into blocks like Toonami and Adult Swim, along with developing its own animated series with characters and storylines that were some of the deepest and most well-written people had seen in a long time. Unfortunately, the good times were not to last, as by the mid to late 2000s, it appeared those now in charge did not look as favorably on the medium. A lot of people point the finger directly at Stuart Snyder and Robert Scorcher, who were more or less put in charge of the network in 2007 after Jim Samples resigned and Jennifer Davidson's sudden death. The next 2 years under their direction became known for Cartoon Network seemingly trying to get away from the animation medium it was created for, canceling a number of the shows that made it a hit, and leaning more and more toward live action production, culminating with the infamous CN Reel block in 2009 that featured 6 live action shows and itself didn't even last a year after massive viewer backlash. I was originally prepared to rant all over Snyder and Scorcher in this intro for the ridiculous idea that CN Reel would work. However, upon further research, it looks like what we're going to tackle today is actually an example that this may have been a path Cartoon Network was going down anyway. See, this movie, which many point to as the low point for Cartoon Network and the start of the Dork Age, first aired in December 2006, 1 month before the infamous Aqua Teen Hunger Force ad campaign that forced Samples to resign a month later. Stuart Snyder had only been in charge for 4 months when the TV series the movie spawned premiered in September of 2007, and in fact was named president at almost the same time that production on the series began. Given all the hurdles a TV show usually must go through before production even begins, it lends to reason that this debacle was something Warner and CN had already committed to. There was also that infamous quote from Adult Swim head Mike Lazo about adults not caring about animation quality, which I can't verify when that happened because the Cartoon Brew page it was cited on has been taken down. The point is, it looks like there were more people responsible than just the ones most blamed for the direction Cartoon Network went at this time. But that still doesn't mean the time period wasn't an absolute tire fire for the network, and it all pretty much started with this movie and TV series. So it's finally time for TV Trash to look at the Cartoon Network movie ReAnimated and its corresponding series, Out of Jimmy's Head. Now, I won't go into excessive detail on the movie since a number of other online reviewers have already done that, so I'll just give you the basic gist of the movie and tackle some issues that I think they glossed over. The movie takes place in this crazy world that acts like it's a cartoon itself, highlighted especially by the family of our main character, Jimmy. Not only is his dad every cartoon father ever with even less intelligence, but his sister is a space alien. For the record, it is mentioned in the series that she's adopted, meaning Jimmy's astronaut mother must have abducted an alien creature and brought it home like a pet, but I don't think that was ever mentioned in the movie itself. Which means if that's all you watched, you might get the idea that the sister was the result of something else the mother did in space. Think Out of This World meets Maury Povich. You're not getting that image out of your head anytime soon. Anyway, the issue with Jimmy is that he's a complete pushover whom everyone takes advantage of, especially his supposed best friend Craig. Yet I suspect the only reason Jimmy is friends with Craig is because he has the hots for Craig's sister Jenny, who herself is a big fan of the cartoons of Milt Appleday. Appleday is clearly this world's version of Walt Disney, right down to Jimmy's class taking a field trip to the Appleday themed amusement park Golly World. Yeah, this movie can't even parody Disneyland without blatantly ripping off someone else's parody of Disneyland. The comparisons to Disney go right down to an urban legend that Milt's brain was removed after he died and is now hidden in the park somewhere. Sadly, I can't accuse them of stealing that plot point from iCarly because that episode came out 3 years after this movie did. So if anything, iCarly ripped off this movie and are not sure which is sadder. The kids naturally pressure Jimmy into looking for the brain by sneaking into the tunnels underneath the park, which actually isn't as far-fetched as you think because Walt Disney World is built on a system of man-made tunnels created so the character employees can travel from one part of the park to the other without being seen. I'm just guessing those real-life tunnels aren't actually an ice cavern like in the movie, where Jimmy runs into Snidely Whiplash, who scares him out of the tunnels and running screaming through the park until, well... Fortunately, every single employee in the park is a doctor, and they deduce Jimmy needs an emergency brain transplant. So, get this, the doctor that actually removed Milt Appleday's brain and kept it hidden for 30 years suddenly decides to give Jimmy Milts. I'm gonna leave it to those other reviews of the movie to point out all the reasons this thing is stupid. And after a brain surgery that apparently didn't even require shaving Jimmy's head, because why would we get rid of that haircut that rips off Jackson from Hannah Montana? Jimmy wakes up with Milt's brain inside of him, yet is still himself. Only now, he has all of Milt Appleday's creations running through his head.
Hey, I'm a pea-brained alligator. Croco's a family name.
The guy who's dumber than a sack of potatoes.
Golly, you're being a bad guest.
Well, you're being a worrywart.
You're being mean.
And I'm being hilarious.
It's kind of like that Days of Our Lives plot on Friends when Joey's character, Dr. Drake Ramore, was saved by getting a woman's brain put inside of him. Only this version would make Ross even more crazy with disbelief. So all of Milt's characters keep doing these jerk-ass things to try and make Jimmy more popular and confident, I think. And this leads to him getting made the head of Appleday Studios. Much to the dismay of the former president, the Snidely Whiplash wannabe, who now wants to take Milt's brain from Jimmy since he's actually been looking for it all these years. See, Mr. Supervillain is actually Sonny Appleday, Milt's son, who has been running the company since Milt died and running it into the ground. Hence why he wants the creative genius inside his father's brain. This is where it gets really depressing for me because this makes it look like the creators actually did do some research besides just the urban legends. In the last years of Walt Disney's life, there actually was turmoil within his family, as he and his brother Roy O. Disney had a major falling out over what direction the company should go. They did try to patch things up, but things were still never really the same. Then the infamous Dark Age of Disney came in the 20 years after after Walt's death, with the company mostly being run by his son-in-law, Ron Miller, to the point where Walt's nephew, Roy E. Disney, led a boardroom coup to oust Miller and replace him with Michael Eisner, which led to even deeper rifts in the family that weren't truly resolved until Roy had to lead another movement to oust Eisner another 20 years later. Between that and poking jabs at exactly how Walt died, the movie seems to be going into overdrive to really belittle Disney here. Maybe it's just Warner taking cheap shots at their biggest competitor at the animation field, but given that many of the cartoon characters Jimmy sees are adapted from things not made by Disney, it just makes you wonder. Anyway, to try and sum up the movie, the second half is pretty much remaking the story of so many other kids' movies where the main character has to take on the responsibilities of an adult and celebrity, and this causes him to lose touch with his friends. Though many who've watched this question just how much these brats actually were Jimmy's friends, while Sonny launches a massive scheme to kill Jimmy that ultimately goes awry because Jimmy gets turned into a cartoon by the other toons somehow. And Jimmy, I guess, just gives up the position of running the company, and again, no one likes him because he's not famous anymore. And I thought the Buddy Bears had bad morals. But yeah, the movie has been universally despised even by its target audience, and it's not hard to see why. It's more than just the plot being all over the place. It ultimately comes off like the movie has half a dozen plots that were all put together in a blender on Liquify. And yet the movie? Still better than the TV series it spawned. How is that possible, you might ask? Well, everything I just summed up from the movie? Yeah, almost nothing that happened there is referenced in the series. Here's what crosses over. Jimmy has Milt Appleday's brain and all of the cartoons are still talking in his head. He's looked on as an outcast by his peers because of all that. And Sonny still wants to take the brain from Jimmy. It's not even really mentioned why he wants the brain at all now. But he still has plenty of chances to get it because he still lives with Jimmy's family. Yeah, did I forget to mention he conned Jimmy's father into letting him move in during the movie? And yeah, he's still living under that roof despite him, you know, trying to murder Jimmy multiple times. And yeah, people have pointed out how Sonny can even still be around at all given that Alien's sister supposedly vaporized him in the end. But they did show it was just a teleport spell since the sister then teleported herself out. Other than that, most of the episode's stories are just junk you could find in any kid's show. Like where Jimmy and Craig spy on a girls' night out party that's all about insulting boys, or Jimmy and Robin trying to cut school, combined with the occasional evil plan by Sonny to get Milt's brain out of Jimmy. In fact, to be honest, the toons themselves are quite often superfluous to most of the stories if you really think about it. But let's now get into the main problems with the movie and the series as a whole. There's the whole thing about this world acting like a cartoon world itself, which others have already touched on with the problems it creates. Cartoon Hero mentioned how if this world is a cartoon, how does it make sense for cartoons and cartoon characters to exist, and how their existence and storyline takes away from the potential to build more around the crazy world itself. Mr. Enter, meanwhile, pointed out how the cartoony gags don't work in the real life setting, and this proves how the whole concept of a cartoon in live action can't work. Some people have basically called me an Enter apologist, but this is one time where I can't really agree with him. I've seen live action productions that actually worked like cartoons. And I'm not talking about stuff like Ned's Declassified, no. I'm talking about stuff that was made at least as far back as the 1960s. Shows like Bewitched, I Dream of Jeannie, Green Acres, Gilligan's Island all relied heavily on physical comedy and other very cartoony concepts. And they pulled them off using really simple techniques like forced perspective and speeding up the camera. If you want to see a full live movie that comes off like a cartoon, watch It's a Mad, 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 Mad World. For my money, still the greatest comedy film ever made. If you want something a little more recent, there's the 1988 film adaptation of Pippi Longstocking. This concept can work, but it takes effort, which is something clearly no one involved with this project wanted to put in. For a show that is basically combining Roger Rabbit with Star Trek, the whole thing has nothing interesting. If it wasn't for the whole thing about the tunes in his head, Jimmy would just be a typical loser outcast preteen that you've seen in every other kid's sitcom before. And even that added detail doesn't help, because on the rare occasion that the tunes do directly interact with Jimmy's conflict in an episode, they rarely make things better. In fact, the tunes are probably the worst part of this whole series. In one episode, Golly Gopher is seen treating Croco about as bad as Ren treats Stimpy. And keep in mind, Golly is supposed to be this world's version of Mickey Mouse. Maybe the most cheerful, friendly, saccharine cartoon character ever made. In another, Jimmy has to ruin his chances in a talent show by using Tux the Penguin's terrible jokes, or else he'll hurt Tux's feelings. And this is just another way to keep Jimmy as an outcast in the school by doing the right thing. Basically, Tux is treated like Fozzie Bear and Muppet Babies without anything charming whatsoever. The other characters haven't gotten any better. Craig is still a jerk looking to always meddle in Jimmy's life, while Jenny has gotten even worse, as she just looks upon Jimmy with disgust most of the time, despite Jimmy, you may recall, saving her life in the end of the movie. And we thought Zelda was a bitch to Link in the 80s animated series. The best character on the show might be the sister Yancey, and that's really just by default. Her lone purpose in the entire thing is to always get in the way of Sunny's evil plans. And she doesn't even really do it because she's protecting her brother, as much as it's just the fact that he always annoys her. It makes you wonder if Dan Povenmire saw this, knew he could do it better, and that's basically how we got Doofenshmirtz and Candace in Phineas and Ferb. And that brings us to Sunny himself, who basically could be the greatest example of wasted potential and the show's whole cartoon-like world not working. Again, I'm trying not to mimic Enter here, but Sunny could have been an extremely likable villain on the level of Wile E. Coyote if they had done him right. The entire reason why Sunny wants his dad's brain is because he was shown disrespect his whole life, even by said father, for not having his dad's creativity. He's not some greedy executive who is bleeding the company dry for his own personal gain. He pretty much wanted to run the studio well, even if it's to try and please his dead father who never showed him any love to begin with. There's actually a lot of potential to make that a character that we can sympathize with and even hope can be redeemed, or at least someone we can laugh at. Which, by the way, is something Disney itself has done pretty well in recent years. Unfortunately, it's ruined by making him so over-the-top villainous, combined with no one else, especially in Jimmy's family except for maybe the sister, even catching on that he's evil. Forget Snidely Whiplash, he's basically Dr. Draken without anything that made that character funny or endearing. It's not like it's impossible to have over-the-top supervillains in live action that are entertaining. The James Bond films are pretty much built on that. But here, it's almost like the entire purpose of Sunny's character is to show how stupid a cartoon villain would look in real life and not in a comedic way, as if to disparage the entire character type to begin with. Oh my god, I think I just cracked the code. It's become all clear to me. This movie and series were made bad on purpose! This was the biggest case of sabotage in the history of television since Galactica 1980! No, really, hear me out on this. Cartoon Network was planning to do a huge MTV-level shift to live shows for who knows how many years to this point. What would be the best way in their minds to get their viewers on board with this change? Make a movie and series that uses live action in conjunction with animation to outright belittle animation. The series has its world's greatest legendary cartoonist who is shown to be a nutcase and a terrible father in person. The son in question, who just wants to be a great cartoonist like his father, is portrayed as a villain. Liking the cartoons themselves is considered taboo even amongst the children they are supposedly aimed at, and at no point in time is this negative attitude toward cartoons meant to be ironic or wrong in any real way. This is enforced further by making all the cartoon characters themselves jerks and frequently causing problems in the main character's life. Every single thing in this series as a whole is intended to put cartoons and what they are known for in a negative light. Time Warner and Cartoon Network's plan from the beginning was to turn its audience off to animation. Think I'm looking too deep into this? Here are the promo ads they ran for Seeing Real.
Your name is Cartoon Network, so you expect to see nothing but animation when you flip CN on your TV. But the times they are a-changing, so don't get left behind.
No, you sanctimonious jackass! You know what an example of not getting left behind is? Moving to 3D animation! Yeah, tangent time again. One thing I don't like Disney getting criticized for is how they've supposedly abandoned 2D animation, like that's real animation and 3D is just some gimmick. I maintain that Walt himself would approve of the move to 3D because Walt was an innovator, always looking to try new things and test new technology. More than anything, he cared enough about animation to do whatever it took to keep his company's studio in operation. This one ad looked to single-handedly send cartoons back to the animation age ghetto. It practically tells its audience that liking cartoons is not cool and you need to grow up. And that would be even worse at the time because by 2007, people were learning how animation could be made for all audiences. Especially since animation from other parts of the world that did just that were becoming more available to American audiences. Cartoon Network was even partially responsible for that thanks to Adult Swim and Toonami. And then they completely tried to abandon that mindset and launched a campaign that flat out said if you came to Cartoon Network expecting to see cartoons, there's something wrong with you. This reminds me of how so many wrestling fans accuse WWE of not listening to their audience when it comes to what they want to see. But that's nothing compared to what Cartoon Network and Warner did here. Pushing Roman Reigns as the top name in WWE is kind of like Cartoon Network shilling Teen Titans Go, which I've talked about before. This is more like putting the World Heavyweight title on David Arquette. If WCW had intended to push guys like Arquette as the stars of their promotion from then on. I mean, maybe some people don't like the type of wrestlers WWE pushes, but they are still wrestlers. By the mid-2000s, Cartoon Network had clearly developed a distaste for animation and made it perfectly clear, which makes you wonder why they were in charge of the Cartoon Network at all. That would be bad enough, but for them to make something like ReAnimated to show that distaste just reeks of laziness, because they didn't even put out any real effort in their big attempt to make the biggest change in network direction since MTV. And that, in essence, is why ReAnimated, Out of Jimmy's Head, and the whole direction Cartoon Network took with its CN Real block was such a garbage fire, because it was the epitome of we no longer want to try. This movie and series make up a microcosm of why I have such contempt for modern-day Warner and continue to give Disney a lot of slack. Throughout its entire history, Disney has done its best to embrace what it was founded on while also looking to the future in a good way. They've always tried to go forward in animation, never being ashamed of it and believing that people of all ages can always enjoy what they create. Warner in these last few years has gone backwards, retreating into the belief that animation can only work for young audiences, that they don't have to put actual effort into their attempts to entertain. And this was pretty much the worst case of that attitude, as trying to phase cartoons off of the network with this movie, this series, and the whole CN Real experience worked out about as well as New Coke. The good news is it only took about a year or so before the network actually got the hint. And the response was not only to scrap the live-action shows altogether, but by 2010, they began airing new animated shows clearly intended for a variety of ages. And to be honest, they still have produced or aired a variety of different shows, even in most recent times. It's just how they've shown favoritism towards certain shows over others where the current issues lie. The ultimate lesson in all of this is, yes, we all need to change, adapt, and try new things in order to avoid getting stale. But you have to be careful and know your audience when doing so. If not, you risk alienating them with something they have no interest in. Like that time you tried to add sports talk to your website? We don't talk about that time period! See you next time on TV Trash.